The blue crystal being shook as it pressed its three-fingered hand against the communication console. Ambassador Keth 7 had never felt fear like this before. His whole world was dying, and the screams of his people echoed through the crystal cities as dark shapes moved through the streets. "Please, anyone who could hear this message." Keth 7 spoke into the transmitter. His voice carried the musical tone that all Zenari possessed, but now it cracked with desperation. "This is Ambassador Keth 7 of the Zenari Republic, speaking for the Galactic Council. We need help. The Vex Horde has broken through our defenses. Our colonies are falling one by one." The transmission shot out into space, carrying with it the hopes of 17 different alien species. It traveled past dead worlds where the Vex had already fed, past burning space stations, and into the unknown regions of the galaxy where no council ship had ever gone. The message was simple but desperate. Help us, or we all die. 3 weeks later, the signal reached a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. The humans called it Earth, though they were not yet known to the galaxy. Admiral Jack Morrison was drinking his morning coffee aboard the USS Defiance when the communication officer rushed onto the bridge. "Sir, you need to hear this," Lieutenant Collins said, his face pale. "We just picked up a signal from deep space. It's not from any Earth nation." Admiral Morrison set down his coffee cup and walked to the communication station. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen many battles. At 55, he had fought in 3 wars and thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The alien voice filled the bridge with its strange musical quality. The translation. Software struggled at first, then began converting the words into English. As the message played, every person on the bridge fell silent. They were hearing the voice of a dying civilization. "Play it again," Admiral Morrison ordered quietly. The message repeated, and this time the full meaning hit them. Somewhere out there, an entire alliance of alien species was being destroyed by something called the Vex Horde. They were asking for help from anyone who could hear them. "Sir, what do we do?" Lieutenant Collins asked. Admiral Morrison stared at the star chart on the main screen. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command, now." Meanwhile, on Earth, Marine Colonel Lisa Hayes was running her morning training exercise when her communication device buzzed. She stopped mid-stride, causing the 50 Marines behind her to nearly crash into each other. Colonel Hayes never stopped during training. Ever. "Ma'am?" Sergeant First Class Bobby Tucker asked, jogging up. Beside her, Colonel Hayes read the message on her device twice before she believed it. "Change of plans, Sergeant. Get everyone back to base immediately. Full combat readiness." "What's the situation, ma'am?" Colonel Hayes looked up at the sky, where she could just see the morning star Venus fading in the dawn light. "We just got our first alien contact, and they're asking for our help in a war." The news spread through Earth's military channels like wildfire. General Frank Carter, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, called an emergency meeting. Presidents and prime ministers held urgent video conferences. Scientists double-checked the signal to make sure it was real. Dr. Emma Clark, Earth's leading expert in theoretical xenobiology, was pulled away from her research at MIT to analyze the alien transmission. She had spent her entire career studying what alien life might be like. Now she was face to face with the real thing. "The language structure is complex but logical," she explained to the assembled military leaders via video link. "Their anatomy appears to be silicon-based rather than carbon-based. But the important thing is what they're telling us about this enemy." Captain Ryan Brooks, one of Earth's best fighter pilots, studied the tactical data that the aliens had included. With their message, what he saw made his blood run cold. Entire star systems had gone dark. Billions of beings had simply vanished. The enemy moves in swarms, he reported to his squadron. They consume everything organic and use it to make more of themselves. According to this data, they've already destroyed hundreds of worlds. The debate in Earth's leadership lasted only 6 hours. Some argued that humanity should hide and hope the threat passed by. Others said they should try to make contact but avoid getting involved in an alien war. But the majority reached a different conclusion. We can't ignore this, President Martinez said during the final vote. If these Vex things are as dangerous as the aliens say, they'll reach Earth eventually. Better to fight them far from home with allies than wait for them to come to us. The orders went out immediately. Admiral Morrison was given command of the largest space fleet Earth had ever assembled. Colonel Hayes received orders to prepare her Marines for combat in unknown environments against unknown enemies. Captain Brooks found himself leading not just his squadron, but training pilots from around the world for a mission. No human had ever imagined Dr. Clark was assigned to the fleet as humanity's first contact specialist. She had less than a week to prepare for meeting alien species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. As the human fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and looked out at the other ships. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and support vessels stretched as far as he could see. Earth had committed everything to this mission. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the aliens," Lieutenant Collins reported. "Put it through." "Ambassador." Keth 7's voice filled the bridge again, but this time it carried a note of hope. "Unknown species, if you received our message and are coming to help, please know that the entire Galactic Council is grateful. We are sending you coordinates to our rally point at Zenari Prime, but please hurry. The Vex are less than 2 weeks from our home world." Admiral Morrison nodded to his communication officer. "Send a reply. Tell them Earth is coming, and we're bringing friends." The human fleet jumped faster than light speed, heading toward their first contact with an alien civilization. None of them knew they were about to show the galaxy what a species from a death world could do when their friends were in danger. Behind them, Earth continued spinning in its orbit around the sun, the same as it had for billions of years. But everything had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and they were going to war. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zenari system. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, staring at the sight before him. He had prepared for many things, but not for this. The Zenari home world burned. Massive dark shapes moved between the crystal cities like hungry shadows. Explosions lit up the planet's surface in brilliant flashes. In orbit around the planet, alien ships of a dozen different designs fought desperately against something that looked like a living nightmare. "My God," Lieutenant Collins whispered. "What are those things?" The Vex ships were not built like anything humans had ever seen. They were organic, covered in what looked like black armor plating that moved and shifted. Some were as large as Earth's biggest carriers, but they moved with the fluid grace of hunting animals. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission," the communications officer reported. "Put it through." Ambassador Keth 7's voice came through the speakers, but it was different now. Where before it had been musical and desperate, now it carried exhaustion and disbelief. "Unknown vessels, this is Ambassador Keth 7. Are you the ones who answered our call for help? Please identify yourselves." Admiral Morrison stepped forward. "Ambassador, this is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your message and came as quickly as we could." There was a long pause. Then Keth 7's voice returned, filled with something that might have been hope. "Earth, we have no record of your species in our databases. What manner of beings are you?" "We're human," Admiral Morrison replied, "and we're here to help." Dr. Emma Clark moved to the communication station. She had spent the entire journey preparing for this moment. "Ambassador, I am Dr. Emma Clark. I specialize in interspecies communication. We would like to coordinate with your forces." Another pause, then a different voice came through the speakers. This one was deeper, more mechanical. "Humans, this is War Commander Zeth Prime of the Galactic Defense Force. We appreciate your offer of assistance, but you should know that we are losing this battle. The Vex have overwhelmed our defenses. Your ships appear small compared to our heavy cruisers. How many warriors do you bring?" Admiral Morrison looked at Colonel Hayes, who had joined him on the bridge. She stepped forward. "War Commander, this is Colonel Lisa Hayes of the Earth Marine Corps. We have brought 15,000 combat personnel." The silence that followed lasted so long that Dr. Clark wondered if the communication had been cut. Finally, "War Commander." Zeth Prime spoke again. 15,000? That is all? We have lost millions of warriors in this battle. How can such a small force make any difference? Colonel Hayes smiled grimly. "War Commander, you haven't seen humans fight yet." Admiral Morrison ordered the fleet to move closer to the battle. As they approached, the alien ships became clearer on the screens. The Galactic Defense Force vessels were elegant things, built for speed and precision. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that lit up space in brilliant colors. The Vex ships were the opposite. They were dark, brutal things that seemed to absorb light. Their weapons were different too. They fired living projectiles that seemed to hunt their targets. "Sir, the alien commander is requesting permission to come aboard," Lieutenant Collins reported. "Granted, but full security protocols." An hour later, Admiral Morrison stood in the main conference room facing the first alien he had ever seen. Ambassador Keth 7 was exactly as he had imagined from the voice. A tall, crystalline being that seemed to be made of living blue glass. But what surprised him was how fragile the alien looked. Dr. Clark was busy with her translation equipment. But Ambassador Keth 7 spoke perfect English now. "Your translation systems are remarkably advanced," he said, his voice still carrying that musical quality. "I have downloaded your language files." "Ambassador," Admiral Morrison began, "we need to understand what we're facing. Tell us about the Vex." Keth 7's crystal form seemed to dim slightly. "They are parasites, Admiral. They consume organic matter and use it to create more of their kind. They feel no pain, show no mercy, and never retreat. They have been moving through our space for 2 years, destroying everything in their path." Colonel Hayes leaned forward. "What's their weakness?" "Everything has a weakness. If they have one, we have not found it. Our strongest warriors cannot match their physical strength. Our heaviest weapons barely slow them down, and they adapt quickly to our tactics." Dr. Clark looked up from her equipment. "Ambassador, may I ask about your physiology?" "For medical purposes, in case we need to treat wounded." "Of course. We Zenari are silicon-based life forms. Our bodies are crystalline in nature. We are not as physically robust as some species, but we make up for it with our technology." "How robust?" Colonel Hayes asked. Keth 7 gestured to his form. "A fall from height would shatter us. Extreme temperature changes can cause us to crack. We require specific atmospheric conditions to survive." The humans exchanged glances. Dr. Clark spoke carefully. "Ambassador, humans are quite different. We evolved on what you might consider a hostile world. We can survive in a wide range of environments." "How wide?" Keth 7 asked. "We can function in temperatures from well below freezing to over 100 degrees Celsius. We can survive falls that would kill most creatures. We can go without food for weeks, without water for days. We heal from injuries that would be fatal to many species." Keth 7 stared at them with what might have been disbelief. "That is ... impressive. But the Vex are still formidable opponents. Our greatest warriors, The Thraxian shock troops stand 3 meters tall and have natural armor plating. Even they cannot stand against the Vex in direct combat. Colonel Hayes smiled. We'd like to? Meet these Thraxian shock troops. That can be arranged. War Commander Zeth Prime has agreed to coordinate with your forces. But I must warn you, the Vex will attack this position within hours. If you are going to retreat, now would be the time. Admiral Morrison stood up. Ambassador, humans don't retreat. We adapt. As if summoned by his words, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lieutenant Collins's voice came over the intercom. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting massive Vex movement. They're heading straight for us. Keth 7's crystalline form began to glow with what Dr. Clark realized was fear. They come. Admiral, you should order your ships to withdraw. The Vex will be here within the hour. Colonel Hayes was already moving toward the door. Admiral, request permission to deploy Marines for ground support. Granted. Ambassador, we'll need coordinates for landing zones. Keth 7 looked between the two humans as if they had gone insane. You intend to fight? On the surface? Against the Vex ground forces? That's what we came here to do, Admiral Morrison replied. As the human fleet moved into position, Captain Ryan Brooks prepared his fighter squadron for their first alien combat. Mission. The enemy was approaching fast, and soon they would discover what humans could do when their friends were in danger. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the best way to fight monsters was to call upon the monsters that chose to be heroes. Captain Ryan Brooks gripped the controls of his fighter as the first wave of Vex ships came into view. He had flown combat missions over 3 different continents on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for this. The enemy vessels moved like living things, twisting and turning through space in ways that defied everything he knew about physics. Dragon Squadron, this is Dragon Leader, he spoke into his radio. Stay tight and follow my lead. We don't know what these things can do yet. The Vex ships were closing fast. They were smaller than the human fighters, but moved with deadly grace. As they approached, Ryan could see they were covered in what looked like black scales that shifted and moved. Red lights pulsed along their sides like heartbeats. Dragon Leader, this is Control, came Admiral Morrison's voice. You are cleared to engage. Show them what Earth pilots can do. Ryan smiled grimly and pushed his fighter into a dive. The first Vex ship turned to meet him, firing weapons that looked like streams of living darkness. Ryan rolled left, feeling. The alien weapon passed close enough to his cockpit that he could hear it hissing against his hull. These things are fast, he reported, pulling into a tight turn that would have knocked out most alien pilots. But they fly like they're thinking, not like they're programmed. Behind him, Lieutenant Tommy Silva engaged his own target. The young pilot had grown up racing hoverbikes through the canyons of Colorado, and his reflexes were lightning fast. The Vex ship tried to match his maneuvers, but Tommy was already 3 moves ahead. Got you, he whispered, locking on to the alien vessel and firing. His missiles struck the Vex ship dead center, and it exploded in a shower of organic debris. Dragon 2, good kill, Ryan called out. Dragon Squadron, the enemy can be hurt. Press the attack. Meanwhile, on the surface of the Zanari home world, Colonel Lisa Hayes stood in the command center of a crystal city that looked like something from a fairy tale. The buildings were made of living light, and the streets were paved with materials that glowed softly in the dim light. War Commander Zeth Prime stood beside her, and Colonel Hayes had to resist the urge to stare. The alien was 3 meters tall, and covered in natural armor plating that looked like polished stone. His forearms ended in claws that could tear through steel, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. Colonel Hayes, Zeth Prime said, my warriors are in position. But I must ask again, are you certain your soldiers can fight alongside us? The Vex ground forces are unlike anything your species has faced. Colonel Hayes checked her equipment one more time. War Commander, my Marines have trained for combat in every environment on Earth. We've fought in deserts, jungles, Arctic conditions, and underwater. We're ready. A new voice joined the conversation. Colonel, this is Major Pete Williams. First, platoon is in position on the eastern perimeter. These Thraxian warriors are impressive, but they move like they're afraid of getting hurt. Colonel Hayes nodded. She had noticed the same thing. The alien warriors were powerful and well-armed, but they fought defensively. They sought cover at the first sign of danger and pulled back when injured. It was smart tactics, but it was not how humans fought. Major, remember what we discussed. Show them how Earth Marines handle business. On the northern edge of the city, Sergeant Mike Turner crouched behind a crystal wall with his squad. Beside him, a Thraxian warrior named Kex-9 pointed toward the horizon with one of his 4 arms. The Vex approach. Kex-9 rumbled. They come in numbers that will darken the sky. Perhaps we should fall back to the secondary defensive line. Sergeant Turner looked through his scope at the approaching enemy. What he saw made him whistle softly. The Vex ground forces looked like a cross between giant insects and armored vehicles. They moved on multiple legs and had weapons mounted. On their backs, there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Negative on the fallback, big guy, Turner said. We hold this line. Kex-9's massive head turned toward the human soldier. Sergeant Turner, you are brave, but there are too many. Even warriors of your skill cannot stop such numbers. Turner smiled and checked his rifle. You haven't seen what desperate humans can do yet. The first Vex reached the outer defenses, and the battle began in earnest. The alien defenders opened fire with weapons that created brilliant explosions and beams of energy that could cut through solid rock. But the Vex kept coming, absorbing casualties that would have broken any normal army. They feel no fear, Kex-9 observed, firing his plasma cannon into the advancing horde. They do not retreat when wounded. How do you fight an enemy that cannot be demoralized? Easy, Turner replied, switching to full automatic and laying down a wall of bullets. You don't try to demoralize them. You just kill them all. In space, Captain Brooks was learning the same lesson. The Vex fighters didn't break formation when they took losses. They didn't try to save damaged ships. They just kept coming, wave after wave, like a machine designed for one purpose, destruction. But humans had advantages the Vex had not encountered before. Brooks pulled his fighter through a maneuver that should have torn it apart, using Earth's heavy gravity as his training ground. The Vex pilot tried to follow and failed, its ship breaking apart under stresses its organic structure couldn't handle. Dragon, leader to all squadrons, Brooks called out. These things are tough, but they're not used to pilots who can take high-G maneuvers. Use your Earth training. Pull turns they can't follow. Back in the Crystal City, Dr. Emma Clark worked frantically in a makeshift laboratory. She had samples of Vex biomaterial that the defenders had recovered, and what she was finding disturbed her. Admiral, she reported over the communication link. The Vex are not just parasites, they're adapters. Each generation learns from the previous one. They're getting better at fighting the Galactic Council species. Admiral Morrison's voice came back immediately. What does that mean for us, Doctor? It means they've never fought humans before. They don't know our weaknesses because they've never encountered anything like us. But they're learning fast. As if to prove her point, alarms began sounding throughout the city. The Vex had broken through the eastern defenses. But instead of panic, the human defenders felt something else entirely. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson led her squad through the crystal streets, moving toward the sound of gunfire. She had grown up in Detroit, where running toward trouble instead of Away from it was just another Tuesday. "Ma'am," Private Denny Wright called out, "the alien defenders are pulling back." "Should we follow them?" Sarah looked at the retreating Thraxian warriors, then at the advancing Vex forces. The enemy looked like nightmares made real, but they were still just targets. "Negative, Private. We advance." "Time to show these bugs what humans do when someone threatens our friends." The Vex had conquered dozens of worlds and destroyed entire civilizations. They had faced the best warriors the galaxy had to offer. But they had never faced a species that became more dangerous when cornered, more determined when outnumbered, and more creative when desperate. They were about to learn what happened when Deathworlders went to war. The Battle of Kepler Station began at dawn on the third day of the human-Vex conflict. The space station orbited a gas giant in the outer rim of Cenari space, and it was humanity's first major test against the full might of the Vex horde. General Frank Carter stood in the command center aboard the USS Defiance, watching as reports came in from across the battlefield. What he saw would have broken the morale of any Galactic Council force, but it only made him more determined. "Sir, we've lost contact with the eastern sector," Lieutenant Collins reported. "The Vex have overrun 3 defensive positions." "General." Carter nodded calmly. "What about our casualties?" 17 wounded, sir. No fatalities." Ambassador Keth 7, who had been observing the human command structure, made a sound like crystal chimes breaking. 17 wounded and no dead? That is impossible. The Vex bioweapons are designed to kill within minutes of contact. Dr. Emma Clark looked up from her medical station. "Ambassador, human physiology is different from what the Vex are used to. Our immune systems and healing capabilities are far beyond what they've encountered." To prove her point, she gestured to a corner of the command center where Corporal Tony Martinez sat getting his arm bandaged. The young Marine had taken a direct hit from a Vex bioweapon that should have killed him instantly. Instead, he was complaining about being pulled from the fight. "Doc, I'm fine," Martinez argued with the medic. "It's just a scratch. My squad needs me out there." The medic, a Navy corpsman named Billy Foster, shook his head. "Tony, you have a hole in your arm, the size of a baseball. You're staying put." "I've had worse injuries playing football in high school," Martinez protested. Ambassador Keth 7 stared at the wounded human in disbelief. A Zenari with such an injury would be dead. A Thraxian would need weeks of medical treatment. This human wanted to go back and fight more. On the station itself, the true scope of human endurance was becoming clear. Private Amy Foster had been fighting continuously for 18 hours in an environment that would kill most Galactic Council species within minutes. The atmosphere was toxic, the temperature was below freezing, and the radiation levels were deadly. "Foster, what's your status?" her squad leader asked over the radio. "I'm good, Sergeant," Amy replied, even though her suit's medical sensors showed injuries that would hospitalize any alien warrior. "These Vex things are ugly, but they're not that tough once you figure out where to shoot them." She had discovered that the Vex had weak points in their armor, but reaching those points required getting close enough to touch them. For most species, that meant certain death. For humans, it was just another day at the office. Commander Kate Sullivan ran the field medical station and had been documenting human performance for the past 3 days. What she found amazed even her. Human soldiers were functioning at combat effectiveness levels that should have been impossible. "Admiral," she reported to Morrison, "we have Marines who've been fighting for over 20 hours straight. They're dehydrated, exhausted, and carrying injuries that would kill most aliens. But they're still fighting at near peak efficiency. How? Is that possible?" Admiral Morrison asked. "Earth, sir. Our home world taught us to survive things that would destroy other species. High gravity, extreme weather, dangerous predators, toxic environments. We evolved to keep going when everything else would give up. The Vex were learning this lesson the hard way. Their tactics were based on wearing down enemy forces until they broke and fled. But humans didn't break. They didn't flee. When cornered, they became more dangerous, not less. War Commander Zeth Prime witnessed this firsthand when he joined a human assault team led by Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez. The mission was to retake a section of the station that the Vex had overrun. War Commander, Rodriguez said as they approached the target area, "Stay behind us and provide covering fire. This is going to get messy." Zeth Prime, who stood 3 meters tall and had natural armor, felt strange taking orders from a being barely 2 meters tall with no natural weapons. But he had seen enough human combat to know they were effective. The assault began with the humans doing something that defied all military logic. Instead of using cover and advancing carefully, they charged directly into the Vex positions. Rodriguez led the charge, firing his weapon while running straight at enemies that outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. A Vex warrior met his charge, its claws slashing down at the human sergeant. Rodriguez rolled under the attack, came up behind the alien, and drove his combat knife into what Dr. Clark had identified as a weak point. The Vex collapsed, its bioelectric systems failing. "Rodriguez, behind you!" Another Marine shouted "Dot." The sergeant spun around just as another Vex leaped at him. He couldn't avoid the attack, so he did something that shocked Zeth Prime to his core. He grabbed the Vex's claws with his bare hands and used the alien's own momentum to throw it into a wall. The impact should have shattered every bone in Rodriguez's hands. Instead, he flexed his fingers, picked up his rifle, and kept fighting. How? Zeth Prime asked Dr. Clark later, as they watched the sergeant receive medical treatment for hands that were bruised, but not broken. "Bone density," Dr. Clark explained. "Human bones are incredibly dense compared to most species. Our muscle structure is designed for high-gravity environments. What looks impossible to you is just normal human capability. But it wasn't just physical toughness that gave humans their advantage. It was their mental resilience. When the Vex deployed their psychological warfare weapons, designed to break enemy morale through fear and despair, the humans responded in ways that confused the alien hive mind. Private Danny Ripe was caught in a Vex fear projection field that should have sent him running in terror. Instead, he laughed. "Is that supposed to scare me?" He called out to his squad. "I grew up in Chicago. I've seen scarier things on the way to school." The Vex psychological weapons were designed for species that had lived in peaceful civilizations for thousands of years. They were not designed for a species that had evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Captain Ryan Brooks discovered this when Vex ships began using terror frequencies that were supposed to paralyze enemy pilots with fear. Instead of panicking, Brooks felt something else entirely. "Dragon Squadron," he called over the radio. "These frequencies are actually kind of helpful. They're making the Vex ships easier to track." The human auditory system, evolved to detect predators in Earth's dangerous environments, was turning the Vex's own weapons against them. As the battle raged on, General Carter received a message from the Galactic Council High Command. They wanted to know how humans were achieving impossible results against an enemy that had destroyed their best forces. "General Carter," came the voice of Supreme Commander Vel 7, "our analysts cannot understand your combat reports. Your forces are taking casualties that should be fatal and continuing to fight. Your soldiers are operating in conditions that should kill them. How is this possible?" General Carter looked around the command center, where wounded humans continued, working at their stations, and tired Marines prepared for another assault. "Supreme Commander," he replied, "you have to understand something about humans. We come from a world that's been trying to kill us for millions of years. We learned to survive by never giving up, no matter how bad things get. The Vex think they're fighting a normal species. They're wrong. The Vex had conquered the galaxy by breaking their enemies' will to fight. But they had never faced a species whose will to fight only grew stronger under pressure. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that refuses to stay down. Captain Danny Wright crouched in the maintenance tunnels beneath Vex-occupied Station Delta 7, listening to the alien communications chatter above. His Special Forces team had been behind enemy lines for 6 days, and they had learned things about the Vex that no one else knew. "Control, this is Ghost Team," Wright whispered into his radio. "We've identified the Vex command structure. They're not just individual fighters. There's a central brain controlling each sector." Colonel Hayes's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed, Ghost Team. Can you reach it?" Wright looked at his team. Sergeant First Class Rita Moore checked her explosives, while Corporal Jake Sullivan studied the tunnel schematics. These weren't normal soldiers. They were the kind of humans who volunteered for missions that other species would consider suicide. "Affirmative. Control, we can reach it. But it's going to be a one-way trip. Negative, Ghost Team. Find another way." Wright smiled grimly. "Ma'am, with respect, there is no other way. But that's okay. We knew what we signed up for. 3 levels." Above, the Vex had no idea that humans were crawling through their conquered territory like deadly shadows. The aliens had faced many enemies, but none that could survive in environments toxic to most life forms, or move through spaces too small for normal warriors. Meanwhile, in the main command center, Admiral Morrison studied the tactical display with growing satisfaction. The human unconventional warfare program was working better than anyone had dared hope. "Sir," Lieutenant Collins reported, "Ghost Team has reached the primary Vex command node. They're ready to plant charges." "Ambassador." Keth 7 stood nearby, his crystalline form flickering with what humans had learned was excitement. "Admiral, if your people can destroy that node, it will disrupt Vex coordination across 3 entire sectors." "At what cost?" Morrison asked quietly. "The team will not survive the explosion," Keth 7 admitted, "but their sacrifice could save millions of lives." Morrison nodded. It was the kind of calculation that military leaders had to make, but it never got easier. "Ghost Team, you are authorized to proceed." Wright's voice came back clear and determined. "Copy that. Control. Ghost Team going dark. It's been an honor serving with you all." The explosion that followed could be seen from orbit. When the light faded, Station Delta 7 was gone, and with it, the Vex command structure for an entire battle group. Across the sector, Vex forces suddenly became confused and disorganized, but the humans weren't finished. While Ghost Team had been conducting their mission, other human units had been learning from every engagement. They discovered that the Vex's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Dr. Emma Clark explained it to the assembled alien commanders during the strategy meeting that followed. The Vex adapt quickly, but they adapt as a collective. When one learns something, they all learn it. But that means when one is confused, they're all confused. War Commander Zeth Prime leaned forward with interest. "How does this help us, Doctor?" "Because humans are individuals. We don't think as a collective. Every human soldier can come up with new tactics on the spot. The Vex can't predict what we'll do, because we don't even know what we'll do until we do it." This was proven during the assault on Vex Hive Complex Alpha 9. Lieutenant Sally Michel led her bomber squadron in an attack that defied all military logic. Instead of approaching from a safe distance, she flew her aircraft directly into the Vex defensive grid. "Hammer. Squadron, follow my lead," she called over the radio. "We're going in fast and low." The Vex defensive systems were designed to track targets moving in predictable patterns. They were not designed for pilots who grew up racing aircraft through Earth's crowded skies, dodging buildings and mountains at speeds that would terrify most alien pilots. Mitchell dove her bomber through a gap in the Vex defenses that was barely wider than her aircraft. Behind her, the other human pilots followed, their ships twisting and turning through spaces that the Vex thought were impossible to navigate. "Bombs away," Mitchell called out as her squadron released their payload directly into the heart of the Vex complex. The aliens watching from the command ship could barely believe what they were seeing. How did they survive that? Admiral Zeph-9 asked in amazement. Captain Brooks, who was coordinating the air support, shrugged. Earth pilots learned to fly in conditions that would ground most alien aircraft. Bad weather, mechanical failures, enemy fire. We just adapt and keep flying. On the ground, the human advantage was becoming even more apparent. Marine Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez had been developing new close-quarters combat techniques, specifically designed to fight the Vex. What he came up with horrified and impressed the alien observers in equal measure. "The key," Rodriguez explained to a group of Thraxian warriors, "is that the Vex expect you to be afraid of them. They're designed to intimidate, but intimidation only works if you let it." To demonstrate, he approached a captured Vex warrior that was being held in a containment field. The alien was twice his size and covered in natural weapons that could tear through steel. Any sane being would keep their distance. Rodriguez walked right up to the containment field and stared the Vex directly in what passed for its eyes. Trick is to remember that no matter how scary something looks, it's still just meat and bone. Or in this case, chitin and bioelectric fluid. The Vex warrior lunged at the containment field, its claws scraping against the energy barrier. Rodriguez didn't even flinch. "See? It's trying to scare me. But I grew up in Detroit. This thing's not even in the top 10 scariest things I've seen this week." Commander Kate Sullivan had been documenting these encounters and was beginning to understand something profound about human psychology. "Admiral," she reported, "the Vex psychological warfare is completely ineffective against us." "Not just ineffective, it's actually backfiring." "How so?" Admiral Morrison asked. "The Vex use fear, isolation, and despair as weapons. But humans have lived with these things our entire evolutionary history. We don't just resist them, we use them as motivation. When a human feels scared, they don't run, they get angry. And angry humans are incredibly dangerous. This was proven during the liberation of the Talon mining colonies. The Vex had been using the surviving colonists as psychological weapons, broadcasting their suffering to demoralize human forces. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Private Amy Foster was part of the rescue team that reached the first colony. When she saw what the Vex had done to the civilian population, her reaction was swift and terrifying. "You want to play games with innocent people?" she said, checking her weapon. "Fine, let's play." What followed was not a battle. It was an extermination. The human rescue teams moved through the Vex positions like a force of nature, driven by a fury that the aliens had never encountered. The Vex had faced desperate enemies before, but never ones that became more efficient killers when they got angry. By the end of the day, every Vex on the colony was dead, and the human casualties were minimal. The survivors were rescued, and the Galactic Council received a message that spread through their communication networks like wildfire. "This is Colonel Lisa Hayes to all Galactic Council forces," came the transmission. "The humans are done playing. Defense. Operation Homecoming begins now. We're taking the fight to them." Admiral Zeph-9, watching from the alien command ship, turned to Ambassador Keth-7 with something like awe in his voice. "They're not just fighting the Vex, they're hunting them." "Yes," Keth-7 replied, his crystalline form glowing with hope for the first time in months. "And I believe the Vex are beginning to understand what it means to be prey. For the first time since the war began, the Vex were retreating. They had conquered hundreds of worlds by breaking their enemies' will to fight. But humans didn't break. They bent, they adapted, and they came back stronger. The galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before. The Vex horde in full retreat from an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't defeat. The tide of the war had turned, and the hunters had become the hunted. The Vex home world was a nightmare made real. Captain Alex Thompson looked through his helmet display at the planet's surface and saw nothing but twisted organic structures that pulsed with alien life. The entire world was one massive organism, a breeding ground for the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy. Alpha Team, final equipment check, Thompson announced to his assault squad. Remember, we only get one shot at this. The mission was simple in concept, but impossible in execution. They had to penetrate to the planet's core and plant a bioweapon that Dr. Emma Clark had developed specifically to target the Vex reproduction system. The problem was that no living being had ever survived on the Vex home world for more than a few minutes. "Sir," Sergeant Lisa Park said, checking her environmental suit, "the atmospheric readings are off the charts. Toxic gases, acid rain, radiation levels that would cook most species in seconds." "Good thing we're not most species," Thompson replied with a grim smile. Above the planet, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching as Defiance, the largest fleet in galactic history, prepared for the final assault. Ships from every member species of the Galactic Council surrounded the Vex home world, but everyone knew that the real work would be done by the humans. "Admiral," Ambassador Keth 7 said, his crystalline form dimmed with worry, "are you certain about this plan? The casualties will be enormous." Morrison nodded slowly. "Ambassador, humans have a saying, freedom isn't free. Sometimes the price of victory is higher than anyone wants to pay, but the alternative is worse." Dr. Clark joined them on the bridge, carrying a datapad with her final analysis of the Vex biology. "Admiral, I've identified the core breeding chamber. If Captain Thompson's team can reach it and deploy the bioweapon, it will stop the Vex reproduction cycle permanently." "How long will they have?" Morrison asked. "Once they deploy the weapon, the planet's immune system will detect them within minutes. They'll have maybe 10 minutes to reach the extraction point." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "And if they don't make it?" "Then they'll die with the planet when the bioweapon activates." On the surface, Thompson's team was already moving through the Vex landscape. The aliens had created a world that was hostile to all other life forms, but humans had evolved on. A world that was hostile to everything, including humans. Corporal Danny Martinez pushed through acid rain that would have dissolved most alien species in seconds. His suit's systems were failing, but his body was keeping him alive through sheer human stubbornness. "Captain," he reported, "my suit's compromised, but I'm still mobile. The acid's not getting through my skin yet. How is that possible?" Came Dr. Clark's voice over the radio. "Human skin is tougher than most people realize, Doc. We evolved to handle extreme environments." Behind them, the Vex defenders were responding to the intrusion. But their tactics were designed for enemies that would retreat when faced with overwhelming odds. Humans didn't retreat. They adapted. Sergeant Park found herself surrounded by Vex warriors in a chamber that pulsed with bioelectric energy. Any other species would have been paralyzed by the electrical field. Instead, Park felt her muscles responding faster, her reflexes sharper. "Team, the electrical field is actually helping," she reported with amazement. "It's like drinking pure energy." "That's impossible," came War Commander Zeth Prime's voice from orbit. "Commander," Dr. Clark interrupted, "human nervous systems evolved to handle electrical storms and static discharge. We're probably the only species in the galaxy that can function in that environment." The assault team pressed deeper into the planet's core, encountering defenses that no other species could have survived. The temperature rose to levels that would melt most alloys. The radiation increased to doses that should have been instantly fatal. The atmospheric pressure climbed to crushing levels, but humans had evolved on a world where the environment was constantly trying to kill them. Earth had taught them to survive anything. Core chamber in sight, Thompson reported as they reached their target. The Vex breeding center was a massive organic structure that stretched as far as they could see. Millions of Vex larvae moved through nutrient channels, growing into the warriors that would eventually spread across the galaxy. Deploying bioweapon now, Dr. Clark's voice came over the radio as Thompson activated the device. The weapon was her masterpiece, designed specifically to target the Vex reproductive system while leaving other life forms unharmed. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the planet. The Vex had detected the intrusion and were mobilizing everything to stop it. Alpha Team, you have 8 minutes to extraction, Admiral Morrison announced. The entire Vex Planetary Defense Force is converging on your position. What followed was a running battle that would be remembered in human military history as one of the greatest examples of tactical excellence under impossible conditions. The assault team fought their way through hordes of Vex defenders, while the planet itself tried to kill them. Private Bobby Chun lost his weapon when a Vex acid blast dissolved it completely. Instead of retreating, he grabbed a piece of the alien architecture and used it as a club, fighting his way through enemies that outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. Chun, fall back, Thompson ordered. Negative, sir. Someone has to cover the rear guard. Chun held his position against impossible odds, buying his team the time they needed to reach the extraction point. He fell fighting, but his sacrifice allowed the others to escape. The bioweapon activated just as the human fleet pulled back from the planet. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vex reproductive system began shutting down across the entire world. Within hours, the planet that had spawned the galaxy's greatest threat was dying, but the cost had been high. Alpha Team had lost half its members, and the human fleet had taken heavy casualties. As the survivors returned to friendly space, the magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Ambassador Keth 7 found Admiral Morrison in his quarters, staring out at the stars. Admiral, the Galactic Council wishes to express its gratitude. Humanity has saved the galaxy. Morrison turned to face the alien diplomat. Ambassador, we didn't do this for gratitude. We did it because it was right. I know, Keth 7 replied. That is what makes your species so remarkable. You fight not for conquest or glory, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership and requested that Earth establish permanent defense stations throughout Council space. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the best way to fight monsters was to have monsters of your own, monsters that chose to be heroes. Dr. Clark published her final report on human capabilities, officially classifying Earth as a Class 12, Deathworld, and humans as the first known Deathworld warrior species. The report became required reading for every military academy in the galaxy. Captain Brooks, now promoted to Admiral, established the Human Defense Corps' training facility on a space station orbiting Earth. Alien pilots came from across the galaxy to learn human combat techniques. Though few could master the aggressive tactics that came naturally to Earth-born warriors. The war was over, but humanity's role in the galaxy was just beginning. They had proven that sometimes the most dangerous predator in the universe was the one that had learned to protect others instead of prey upon them. Years later, when other threats arose in the dark spaces between stars, the galaxy would know who to call. Earth's Deathworlders were ready, and they had friends to protect.